Okay, this video is from the Medical Reformation book right here, and we're going to be talking about how do you estimate IQ, to estimate, your own IQ, or, how to estimate IQ in other people pretty quickly. And of course, this is not exact, it's an approximation, but, there's a lot of people too, they get all offended if you talk about IQ, but if you're going to talk about intelligence, and you want to improve your own intelligence, it's good to understand a few things about it. In addition, it's sort of like if you want to be good with money, you're going to talk about money. Rich people talk about money all the time. All right, so people sometimes get offended by IQ, and that's because the school system lies to them and it tells them, well, look, there's nothing you could do about it. Some people have higher or lower IQs, and it's rude and offensive to talk about it. No, it's reality, and I think you need to talk about it. Jordan Peterson has a lot of lectures on it. I'm just going to talk about, some ways to estimate IQ in general. So here's a quote by Oscar Wilde. It is only shallow people who do not judge by appearances. And by the way, I've written a whole bunch of books on study skills, on how to develop intelligence in children, how to become a genius. Basically, if you have good study skills, your academic IQ goes up 30 to 40%. There's a big difference between academic IQ, verbal IQ, mathematical IQ, and social, interpersonal IQ, if you will. All right, so Oscar Wilde, he says, it's only shallow people who do not judge by appearances. Everybody judges by appearances all day long. You have to. Every animal does. It's how it survives. Okay, Michael Merzenich, co-inventor of the cochlear implant, he says, how do you improve a brain? You train it every day. If you want to be good at piano, you practice every day. You want to be good at wrestling, you practice every day. Whatever it is you do, that's how you get good and you stay good. Okay, how do you worsen intellectual performance? You add noise, distractions. The old joke is if the performer, misses one practice, they notice. If they miss two practices, the critics notice. If they miss three practices, the audience notices. Okay, Aristotle has a quote. The first step to having an intelligent conversation is to remove emotions. I do like the thing as Carol Dweck, she's like a Stanford psychologist, she talks about the growth mindset. If a child believes that they can improve their academic performance by hard work and development of skills, study skills, for example, then they will improve. But if they think it's only a fixed thing, then they won't. They won't make the effort. You have to believe something's worthwhile in order to make the effort to learn it, to achieve it. Okay, and to get really good, you got to have the right attitude. A giant part of being really smart is attitude. And I like, Goethe, the German guy, Johann von Wolfgang Goethe. He said, in order for a man to learn a complex topic, he must love it. Because it gives you the energy. Whenever you learn a subject, at first there's the exciting, fun part where everything is cool and you imagine yourself being an expert. And then you hit this long grind where it's kind of tedious and you just have to crank through all the vocabulary and the ins and outs of the field, the intermediate phase. You stay there a relatively prolonged time. But then once you reach a certain level of expertise, you can rapidly improve in it and do all kinds of creative, fun things. But you have to be willing to pay that price. And loving the field helps you get through that long grind, tedious phase and still maintain your enthusiasm. A lot of the really smartest people I know, the ones who are like top level world-class masters, they're enthusiastic and curious about it. They sort of maintain that childlike eagerness, if you will, for that field, that subject. Like I talked to Gregory Sloop, the best atherosclerosis researcher in the world. He's fascinated by all these little molecular biology details. All right. So Aristotle, the first step to having an intelligent conversation is to remove emotions. Yeah, that's a big deal because a lot of people, they take everything personally. As soon as somebody, contradicts them or challenges their statement, they're all offended, they're insulted, they don't like you anymore. There's, this big fuss, and you can never really get anywhere. You have to be able to just quickly keep moving and up and up and up to more sophisticated levels of nuance if you're going to be able to figure out complex things, kind of like the, 5, 6 blind men and an elephant. The first guy thinks the elephant, is a rope because the first blind man holds its tail, another one holds its ear, says it's a rug, another one holds its leg, says it's a tree trunk. And you have to kind of like be unemotional so you can sort of stand up from a higher position and have a bird's eye view and you'll see all the parts of the elephant. You go, it's an elephant, rather than the blind man just clings to the one little thing they know. Let's see, here's another quote by Peter Drucker. He's the efficiency expert. He says, what's measured improves. knowledge has to be improved, challenged, and increased constantly or it vanishes. Yeah, you have to try to learn a little something every day or you end up being a Gomer doc. And what I mean by that is everybody in medicine knows there's some old docs who are able to get through the day and generate their billing codes, but they really have nothing to add to the conversation. So in order for a doc to keep improving and getting good, they have to want it. They have to want to improve. And a lot of times in medicine, there's no incentive to improve. Once you know how to generate billing codes, you just stay there. That's a safe place to be. It has to come from within to have you keep getting good. And it kind of reminds me of, the movie Chariots of Fire, the long distance runners, and they said, where does a man find the strength to run the race to the end? It comes from within. So you got to have that in you, that desire to not just get by, but to be good, and then you keep on getting smarter. Okay, so basically, here's things you can assess when you look at a person. I'm talking about their body right now. Physically, if they're fat, that's a sign of they're not as smart. We'll say we'll start with an average IQ of 100, and there's going to be things that would lower your estimate of their IQ. There's going to be things that increase your estimate of their IQ. And this is all approximate, and it's not always 100% correct, but it's useful. And a person can have several low IQ features and several high IQ features and sort of balance out, if you will. But somebody who's really fat, that's a sign, they're not too bright because they're screwing up and they're not fixing the problem, okay? If they have a tattoo on their face, they look terrible. They look like a criminal, and that's a bad thing to do. It's a sign of stupidity that you would do that because you're going to have to get along with people all through life. So, making your appearance worse in a bad way is stupid. Okay, tattoo on the arms. Tattoos look stupid. I know in modern culture it's real trendy, and part of that is because the public is being gaslighted by the legacy media that's always trying to show you vulgar, sort of immoral, bad things and pretend that they're good, and they're not. So, but a lot of young people are gaslighted by that. They sort of just walk into the world and say, this is how it is. No, there might be a legitimate reason for a tattoo. Let's say you're in a unit and you guys are all going and do this life-risking mission and you all have it as a sign of solidarity. I get that, okay? But just randomly putting something on your arm, like my brother had a tattoo, and he's like, do you know what this means? I said, yeah, it means you're a dumb fuck, okay? It's stupid, you risk getting hepatitis. You better make sure they're not reusing those needles, okay? They're not reusing the colorants that they're using, that they're injecting into you. And then also people get old and their flesh sags and the tattoo just looks stupid. I always sort of try to look at things for the long haul. Okay, it's not stupid. Okay, pierced belly button. Now a lot of women think this is trendy. I just think you look like a sleaze. Okay, and it's not good to look like a sleaze because an intelligent man says, gee, this woman, she might be attractive in some ways, but she looks like a sleaze. She's probably got gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, who knows what, hepatitis, HIV. Herpes or something. Lots of women got all these infectious diseases. So when she's sort of advertising it like that, sort of it's a bad sign. It's like something, the porn star would do or something. It's not attractive. It's low class. Okay, mildly obese, lots of people are. The majority of people are, but it's not a positive sign. I can tell you, I know from a lot of experience, seeing a lot of women, the smarter ones are more likely to be skinny. Don't get me wrong. Some of the really bright ones are fat. But in general, the smarter ones are skinny. I've seen that as a pattern. You walk into a hospital, you'll see a bunch of female doctors that are pretty skinny. And it's just a fact. Less educated ones tend to be fat. And there's plenty of exceptions to this. I know all that, but in general, that's true. Okay, if they got a tattoo on their butt, that's like something you think, it's low class. Tattoo above the ankle, that's even more common. Not as low class, but it's still low class. Okay, if they look slim, trim, fit, energetic, that's a sign that they're smarter, that they've kept their health, their act together. I mean, an intelligent person wants to be healthy, so somebody who's maintained their health, that's a sign they're more intelligent. Don't get me wrong, some people just have bad luck, they get a disease, of course. That's normal, it happens. But in general, you have to estimate things. You're going to be dating somebody, picking somebody who you want to, potentially have a child with, and you want to say, does this person have their act together? Are they going to be around the next 20 years to help me raise this kid? Are they going to have the energy to, go to work and help pay the bills, help take care of this kid? Okay, hair. If they have a crazy hairstyle, that's a sign of low IQ. I mean, it's sort of like a normal person. Why would you want a crazy hairstyle? And please don't say that my monk tonsure is a crazy hairstyle. I'm doing this for a reason. It goes with the book. Okay. If they look disheveled, in public on a routine basis, that's a warning sign. Because why would they do that? You're the first thing people have to judge you. You meet a lot of people who don't know you, is your appearance, and if you're poorly groomed, and there's different levels of being poorly groomed. So a young guy, let's say he's 25 years old, he's looking for a future wife. He wants everything perfect. Okay, look his best to find the best woman he can find. All right, when a guy's older, he's really, he's married, he's got kids, he's not looking for a woman, so he's going to be a little bit less sloppy in his grooming, but not very sloppy. Okay, so being real disheveled, that's a sign of low self-esteem, etc., and it's bad. I was at a restaurant many, many years ago with my parents and my dad, and the waiter had this bizarre, crazy haircut. And I was a young guy. I don't know what I was, 20 years old or something. I asked my dad, I go, why did he cut his hair like that? And my dad says it's like a neon sign that says, I expect to be poor the rest of my life. And that was kind of true because, think about if you're going to go to real estate. A lot of realtors are pretty good with money. In the realtors, they have to play this game of gaining a person's trust. Before you're going to buy a house from somebody, you're going to have to make big financial investment and rely on that realtor a lot. So you got to trust them. And I knew some of these realtors that were, millionaires, and I noticed some things about them. One of them was a guy, he always, wore a tie and had a suit on, and he went to church. He was one of the servers at the mass. And people like that because they know every Sunday he's going to be there. So if there's a problem with their real estate purchase or process of trying to buy or sell a property, they know they can find him every Sunday in church. He's not just going to disappear on them. Okay, and he had a lot of credibility, and the guy's a multimillionaire. And it wasn't that rich of a neighborhood. It was a decent neighborhood, not a rich neighborhood. Guy's a multimillionaire. And I've seen other real estate agents that are multimillionaires, and a big part of it is because, and often they'll advertise in the church bulletin. So what they're sort of saying is they're sending the message, you can trust me, I am reliable, and I am with it, I'm an intelligent person. And that's a good thing, because people don't want to, share their money information unless they think the other person is reliable, they're not a criminal, they're honest, they're intelligent, you can count on them. Okay, so just dressing nice. I look at sales reps, I've had other, doctor guys we talk and will say, the only time a pretty girl talks to me is if it's a prostitute or a sales rep. And they're kind of kidding, but the truth of the matter is, look at sales reps. They're trying to sell something, so they want to put forth their best impression. They're going to be dressed nice, they're going to be well groomed, they're going to be in good physical fitness shape, and part of it's because they hire good looking people. These, my experience was mostly working as an imaging guided surgeon, interventional radiologist. They would always have these good looking sales reps coming, trying to sell you the latest product from the company. Okay, all right, next thing is looking at their face. An intelligent person is usually pretty pleasant and nice. The reason is you have to be somewhere anyways. Why not be pleasant and be nice to people? It's a sign of intelligence. When somebody's kind of got this rude, angry look on their face, it's usually a sign that they're kind of stupid, or sometimes it's because they're very young, and they're sort of, young people sometimes can be very ignorant, they're not well raised, and they don't have very good social skills, and sometimes they can grow out of that. But an older person looking like that, they're just stupid. I mean, life is difficult enough, and that first impression is all somebody has to judge you. So if you're starting out with a rude expression, that's a sign that they're kind of stupid and low class. So you avoid them. You say, well, I got enough problems in my life, I don't want to be dealing with this angry looking kind of stupid person here. Okay, so that's a -10 off their estimated IQ. Like I said, if they're bizarrely groomed, that's also bad. They might think they're being creative, but real creativity is, write a nice poem, write a nice song. Okay, do something that requires some skill. Just, painting your head sort of reddish pink and purple and piercing your eyebrow, it's not really creative. It's just a sign you're stupid. Okay, pierced eyebrows, low class. Pierced tongue, low class. The person's well groomed, that's a sign they have their act together. They smile, they're friendly, give them +10 estimated IQ points. Okay. And so part of understanding this is so you can project a more intelligent opinion, a more reliable, honest opinion, so people be more willing to deal with you, and be more willing to, buy a car from you, buy a real estate property from you, or do any type of business with you. Okay, now how they dress. If they're going around with no shirt when they should be wearing a shirt, that doesn't look so good. they're wearing a trench coat, sort of like that gothic look, that's a bad sign. A lot of teenagers will do that. That's a bad sign in their appearance. Windbreaker on a cold winter day. Now, that's a sign of being stupid, except that teenagers, I think, have a higher metabolic rate. So sometimes teenagers will dress very little in the way of a coat on a cold day. But I think that might be partly I'm pretty sure it's partly biologic. It's kind of weird though. Sometimes the same teenager who doesn't wear a coat going outside on a cold day will then be sensitive to cold in an indoor environment. It's weird, but I've seen that. Okay, clothes too tight. That's a bad sign. It's a sign that they sort of lack confidence in their brains and they want to be valued more for their body and for their clothes. And again, in a woman, that looks pretty sleazy. In a guy, it just looks low class. Wearing pants that look like they're painted on. It's sort of like, where are you coming from with that? All right, a t-shirt. Like I'll tell a young guy, sometimes I get asked by young guys on how to dress better, to attract a woman or whatever. And I can tell you, when I was in high school, just being an athlete made you popular. And if you're popular, it was relatively easy to get a girlfriend. But you go to college and it's different. And I had this experience at Stanford where I hung around a lot of athletes that were really, high-level athletes, all Americans, really good Division I college athletes. And a lot of them didn't have a girlfriend. And partly it's because Stanford's about one of the worst places in the world to find a girlfriend. But it was also then, I noticed that some of the other places, fraternities, there was this one fraternity where the guys were really kind of had a reputation as trying to look rich or be rich or dress rich. And a lot of those guys had girlfriends, even though they were sort of like wimpy guys, nothing athletic about them at all. And I noticed they would always wear a shirt with a collar. And they were always dressed nice. They were wearing nice shoes, not gym shoes. They were wearing some type of preppy dress shoe or something. And so what I realized is a woman cares more about your bank account than your bench press. Okay, yeah, it's nice that the guy's fit or whatever, but and especially as you get older, when you're in high school, sports is more like the center of the world for a lot of young guys and a lot of young people. But as you get older, it becomes more and more money and status and social connections and what can you do for me and all this type of stuff. And also height. Like if a woman's beautiful, you kind of notice that as soon as she walks in the room. And it's the same thing with a guy being tall. That's another thing that's not widely recognized. I've known a lot of tall guys, and it's pretty routine for a tall guy to have 3 or 5 girlfriends. I'm not kidding. And then all the short guys not to have any girlfriend. Okay, I've seen it. I've known these guys. I've known some of these guys that they would ask me to carry their pages from doctors because they had all these different women calling them. They had a bunch of different girlfriends. And so, anyways, that's kind of getting off on a different side of things. But what I'm trying to say is, if you want to look attractive to women, you want to dress nice, like you've got money, like you're a success in the world or have status or something beneficial to them. Otherwise, they're not even going to talk to you. They'll look at you like you're, some homeless, low-life person. Okay, what else? So yeah, it's valuable to dress nice. You make a better opinion of people. I also know if I go to the grocery store, I haven't done this in many, many years. Nowadays, I don't leave my house most of the time unless I'm wearing a nice shirt and a tie, quite often a suit. Because I just know, like anything I do, I go to the grocery store. If I'm not dressed nicely, I get kind of treated like an old slob. Versus if I'm dressed nice, they're at least polite to me. Not that they care or anything, but I'm an old man. I'm 60 years old, okay? But I just know it makes a difference. Anywhere I go, whatever I do, I get treated much better than I do if I dress poorly. Shirt with a collar +10, a tie +10, a suit +10, lab coat +10. Conversation. I've noticed, most people, almost anyone can talk reasonably well about subjects that are familiar with them. So they stay in their comfort zone. It's a sign of a smarter person. They can handle a wider range of subjects and still remain articulate and fluent and keep up with the pace of the conversation. And the general intellectual ability of a person, it becomes more apparent when they have to speak about something unfamiliar. Like when they have to read something that they're not that familiar with. And I've kind of been amazed, but it's been my experience that lots of people really can't read very well. They might be able to read, the text message, but they can't really read much beyond that. Because I've seen that lots of times. I'll see something and I'll read it like in 1 minute or 30 seconds. And they'll sit there struggling with it for 10 minutes or more. And And I think it's because most people don't read. Most people, after the first year of high school, where they had to read Great Expectorations, Julius Caesar, and other miserable books that are just sort of a waste of time. That's Charles Dickens' worst book, Great Expectorations. They think reading is a painful waste of time. They never read another book the rest of their life. And then when they sit in their car, they listen to music. And the worst is beat music. Beat music makes you stupid. Bump, bump, bump. You can't hold a thought in your brain when there's a bump, bump, bump sound. And also, most heavy metal's kind of cringe metal. Grinding, you can't think with that. Better music has a melody. You can understand the words. It has a meaning to it. It fits with your identity. Like I love Christian music, okay? But in general, I don't listen to music when I'm in a car. The only time I'd listen to music in the car is if I don't have a CD or the CD player is broken. I always listen to an audiobook. Because again, I'm always looking at the long-term thing. If you have two people, starting out in the same place, and one of them is always reading books constantly and listening to audiobooks, their verbal and articulate skills just keep going up and up. And the other person never reads again after freshman year of high school. They really don't progress too much. Because I've also seen people who've been in situations in their life where they got screwed over. They got mistreated. It could be at a job. It could be in some other situations. They're treated unfairly. And they'll ask my opinion, like my legal opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but they'll ask my legal opinion on what do I think or what I recommend. And what I'll notice is they're kind of helpless. They don't have the ability to phrase the situation clearly. They don't have the ability to articulate their point of view, their argument. So they often get treated very badly and they get screwed over. So being able to speak well, to think clearly, it makes yourself stronger, so people are less likely to mess with you because you got more ability to fight back, okay? And you have to constantly be pushing yourself. So like I said, you have to sit in a car every day to commute. Why not listen to an audiobook? You can do it for free. You can listen to a podcast on your phone, whatever you want, but listen to something that develops your brain, because you use it or lose it. And I notice too, I talk to doctors all the time, every day, and I know most doctors are functionally illiterate. And that's a strong statement, but it's true. Very few of them read books. It's only like the smartest of the doctors who read books. And I know a lot of times people have issues. They're working long hours. They like music in the car to relax. And then they get home and they have to take care of their families. Some people have 2 jobs. Okay, fine. But, you have to decide what you want to do and how you want to educate your brain. And if you want your brain to function at the highest possible level, you have to keep developing it. You have to give it exercise every day. Reading a book's like exercising your brain. And writing is much more difficult than speaking. The people that can't read well, it's impossible for them to write anything. Like I said, too, I know very few people who can write. Like, I get tons of emails, and I'll notice, like, if somebody can write well, that stands out. And I notice amongst nurses, too. I know lots of nurses. And the nurse who, got hired and got promoted a lot, she was the one who could write real well. But I know some nurses are really smart with their social skills. Sometimes I like talking to that's one of the reasons why a man likes talking to a woman. Women see the world socially different than we do. And women are kind of like a vacuum for social information, in the sense that, I could work with some guy and we're doing big procedures, big cases and stuff, and I don't know anything about him. I don't care. Do we get along? Can we work through the problems? Can we take care of the patients? Everything's good. I don't need to know his personal life. I really don't care, quite frankly. I mean, if he tells me a story, I'm happy to hear it. Maybe it'll be something interesting. But with a woman, I work with a woman just the first day. So, how old are you? Are you married? Do you have any kids? Where'd you go to school? Blah, blah, blah. And she'll suck all this information out of me, and she'll have this whole detailed map of the social world that most guys are oblivious to. So let's see, getting back to this. It's good to have some practice at writing because it develops your ability to think. You can't BS what you write as much as you can, if you just think in your own head. Let's see. So anyways, whenever I see somebody who can write well, that's a sign of an IQ. To me, what I consider somebody who can write well also is somebody who can surprise me. Not many people can surprise me intellectually, but I was talking to this one doctor. He's a Japanese guy, and he's real bright. And we're discussing a case, and we're discussing some other issue of pathophysiology. And he said a few things that challenged me and surprised me. I'm like, wow, this guy's smart. And I've seen him be real smart because I sometimes take care of other patients with him. He's done a lot of smart stuff. So that's a smart person who can surprise me. I always know I'm dealing with a good writer or a smart person when I see that. And a writer really should surprise you on the first page. If they can't surprise you on the first page, when are they going to do it later? They should put some of their best stuff up front, okay? Okay, good worthwhile writing is better when it's ethical and true. So yeah, some people are liars, and so even though they're smart, they might make you laugh, but you don't really want to talk to them too much if you don't have to, because you can't trust them. So being honest and ethical is important too. And I think like for a man, that's real important. Like my father, my whole life never lied once. I can't remember ever my father lying, and so their word is valuable. Okay, and that makes people more willing to deal with you. If you're going to BS them or lie and play games, then it takes more energy to be figuring out if you're telling the truth or not. And that actually is a sign of a lower IQ, that you don't get the fact that you have to be honest and reliable. Otherwise, it's not worth people's time to interact with you. And we need other people to interact with us for a lot of things in our life, for the enjoyability of the conversation, but also sometimes to work on a problem. And so somebody's going to be more worthy of being hired or promoted in a meritocracy organization, then that would be the case. A lot of organizations are monopolies, of course, and they run based on other things. But I'm going to focus on a meritocracy worldview here. Let's see. Also, yeah, to me, real bright person, they can come from a couple different directions. They're not just the standard basic IQ boring. Another thing about a lot of doctors, the reason they're boring is they all studied biology in college, and they kind of know the same stuff, and they're so exhausted from studying, they didn't really learn almost anything else, so they're kind of boring. Okay, what makes them interesting, like when I used to work in the imaging guided surgery area, and we get new residents every month, and I liked it when they had like done a year outside of school and they had something interesting to say rather than the same old boring stuff. Smart people have better self-control. I know that because I have to talk on the phone to a lot of people, and they keep their cool. You'll have situations that are screwed up. Like for a doctor, a screwed up situation will typically be you want to go home at a certain time. Let's say you're supposed to get off and go home that day at 4 o'clock. And now somebody's calling you saying, sorry, you got to do an emergency procedure, and you're screwed. Now you're going to be stuck going home at 7:30 or something. So you're not happy about it. But you got to keep your self-control. Okay, why are we doing this case? Can this happen tomorrow? What's the issue? Is the patient on any anticoagulants? Do they have any allergies? You have to keep your cool and go through all that stuff. And I know that the real smart people, they keep their cool. They're pissed off. They're gonna be stuck an extra 3-4 hours late, but they keep their cool. And the situation's complex, or somebody's telling them that they misjudged the case, and you disagree with their diagnosis and their treatment plan, and so they keep their cool. That's a sign of intelligence. Whereas people get all pissed off and emotional, it's sort of like, I can't deal with this person. They're just gonna have a big hissy fit, and so you don't have as much respect for them when they behave that way. Okay, some young people I know too, they're smart, but they're so impulsive. Like a lot of young guys, they got this real high testosterone. They think they know everything, even though their educational information in their head is really kind of a joke. They're so young. You can't know that much when you're young. You just haven't had enough life experience. So that's the way a lot of young men screw up. And I think like a perfect example myself, when I was at Stanford, I was a sophomore, and I was doing okay in the wrestling team. I was a varsity starter with a winning record, but I had injuries, and so I really should have been developing faster. And as soon as I thought about quitting, and then Mark Schultz said, Rogers, nothing wrong with you. You hang around with me. And all I did was just listen to him. He was an Olympic champion. Whatever he said, I just did it. And I got way better real fast. And I'm like, man, I screwed up. 2 years I wasted not talking to him. I was scared of him, okay? This big Olympic champ beating the hell out of everybody. I was just a little freshman, sophomore. So once I started hanging around with him and just whatever he said, I did it. I got way better. So that's how young people benefit. Finding an older person who knows a lot, who's willing to teach you. Just shut up and listen and do what they say. And don't argue with them and challenge them too much, because they know better than you. Yeah, sometimes you'll disagree with them and correct them, but most of the time they're going to be right. Okay, Aristotle's quote, the first step to an intelligent conversation is to remove emotions. Okay, let's see. Let me see where this is all coming from. Is this all Aristotle? Okay, yeah, this is all Aristotle. It is the mark of an educated man to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Yeah, you don't jump to an impulsive conclusion. Remain objective, uncommitted until you've heard, the 6 blind men say what they think the elephant is, and then you can commit. Aristotle goes on. He says, there's no prudent young people. Prudence, sort of like wisdom, is concerned with specifics as well as universals. Specifics become known from experience, but young people lack experience. Yeah, that's why you never see a great writer who's a young guy. They just don't have the experience to be a great writer. You never see a great doctor who's a young guy, okay? They just don't have the experience. Look at the nutrition world. There's no great nutrition experts who are really young. Don't get me wrong. Some of these young people coming up now are going to be really good. But I'm just saying, you don't have this big world view when you're 20 years old. It takes time to accumulate experience and knowledge. Okay, Aristotle continues. The highest activity of a man is the pursuit of truth. The life of intellect is the most pleasant and the best life because intellect is that which is unique about man. The greatest of all pleasures is the pleasure of learning. The pleasure of contemplation of truth is continuous and enduring. It does not wax and wane like other pleasures. The aim of art is to show the inward significance of a thing. And that's a little bit like Ayn Rand's quote, that last line, the aim of art, that art is the concretization of metaphysics. Okay, so why am I going into all this stuff? Because sometimes I've had to, tutor young guys, try to help them do better in school and stuff, or young women, college or med school age, grad school age women. And sometimes they get pissed off at me. They're like, why you go into all this stuff? Why all this philosophic stuff? Why all this BS? Just tell me what I have to do for school. And I'm like, you don't understand. You want to develop this philosophic mindset. And I'm not talking about getting, a B plus at a junior college in art history. I'm talking about getting an A plus where everybody in the room is an average academic IQ of like 99.8 or something, okay? And so if you want to, be superior academically to that type of competition level in academics, you need this philosophic view because your brain is trained to remember what you care about. So you're sort of like training your brain to be able to appreciate the nuance of a complex, sophisticated thing, be that biology, nutrition, toxicology, whatever it is. But this type of intellectual development, I can assure you, the really smart people, they're very interested in this sort of stuff. And if you want to really develop yourself to a high level and intellectually, it helps to be sensitive to all this nuance because eventually you're going to run into more and more complex things and you have to be able to handle the nuance, okay? Okay, so this is a little more Aristotle. Yeah, Aristotle's really good for intellectual development. He's one of the smartest people who ever lived. Okay, he says, ordinary words convey only what we already know. It is from metaphor that we can best get a hold of something new. The greatest thing is to be a master of metaphor. It is the mark of a genius to make good metaphors. Yeah, because that's how your brain works. Your brain works on comparisons. You get new information, your brain compares it to what you already know. The knowledge you already have is the scaffold onto which new information is placed. Like you go into a kitchen, there's a shelf for cups, a shelf for dishes, for silverware, and that's basically all the information in your brain. You're just putting the new stuff into the place by its categories and its comparisons to the stuff that's already there. That's how we process cognitive space. Aristotle continues. Metaphors are the one thing that cannot be learned from others, because to be good with metaphors indicates a deep understanding of the likeness of things. Yeah, and it's a little bit like they'll say to be a good writer, you can't really teach style that well because the style sort of comes from their personality and their knowledge. It's sort of built up over time. But you learn stylistic ideas from reading a bunch of writers and seeing what you enjoy yourself. Like I'll enjoy the cleverness and funniness of Voltaire and Oscar Wilde, even though I disagree with them about a lot of things. But I can enjoy their style. Let's see. Okay, behavior. Okay, signs of intelligent people behave in an intelligent way. And what is intelligent behavior? It's behavior in a way that increases your ability to accomplish your goals and to get along with people. Okay, and also, like I think it was Machiavelli had said, the fastest way to judge a person is by who they hang around with, because people are shaped to a large degree by who they hang around with. And you'll see it happens to yourself. Look at kids. If they're hanging around with other kids that are interested in good things, learning the language, learning debate, playing a sport, they'll do those things. But if they're with kids that are into mischief, getting drunk and chasing girls and ditching school, then they're going to do those things. Okay, so who they hang around with, that has a big influence on kids. When they're in the teenager age, they care a lot more about their friends than what their parents say. Okay, you get your sleep, your IQ goes up. You practice a religion. Religious people are a lot more responsible, and they're just more successful academically, and they're healthier in general. It sort of adds to their IQ. It adds to their performance capacity. Because, religion says life has meaning and purpose versus atheism says life is meaningless. So if you think life is meaningless, that doesn't energize you to achieve or to maintain your health or to be resilient and be able to handle the inevitable setbacks in life. Okay, exercise makes a person more attractive, more fit, more energetic. So all those things raise their IQ. Okay, and now a little bit more about like what they put on themselves. The more chemicals a person puts on themselves, the stupider they are. Nobody likes it when some guy, he means well, but he walks in the room and his cologne kind of overwhelms you. It's like, dude, you're invading my airspace, okay? It's obnoxious. And I've told you also, like a lot of people, oh, you got to wear sunscreen. Yeah, BS. I went through all the chemicals in sunscreen. I don't ever wear sunscreen, okay? I don't ever wear cologne or deodorant. I think deodorant, is just like obvious low IQ conformist nonsense. I've talked about all this in my previous lecture on estrogenic chemicals, for example. All right, they hold their cell phone next to their head. It's like, don't you know anything about cell phones? Read the instruction manual, okay? And then, read about EMF. Once you do that, you will never hold it to your ear again unless it's an emergency. They get their adequate sleep, okay? Working a night shift is stupid. People who work night shift, you mess up your circadian rhythms. It's perceived by your body as psychological stress. They often end up with increased diseases, increased cancer, and other problems. If they do that long term, the older you get, the less your body can tolerate that. The older you get, the more fragile you get, so you got to have better habits. Also, somebody who's sleeping too much, more like 9 hours a day, sometimes that's a sign that they're depressed or they have no sense of purpose in their life or that they were out the night before drinking. Okay, they're reading and their intellectual curiosity. Smart people like to read because that's where most of the information is. You can learn some things off the internet, and that's nice. You can learn a lot off the internet. But there's tons of stuff that you're only going to find in a book, okay? And a book you can have sustained reading. You can take this book, you can go sit in the bathroom, okay? And a lot of people, I see them, they'll like take their cell phone into the bathroom to read. And I'm like, it's a little bit disgusting, depending too if you work in a scummy place. A lot of hospitals are kind of filthy, okay? So, I just find that whole idea a little bit disgusting. You've seen my magic bathroom. I got a little table in the bathroom to read. There's always a big book on the portable table and then a little paperback nearby. And you just get through a lot of material that way. So if you're always listening to something in the car, you're always listening to something when you're in the bathroom or reading something. And then at night when you eat your dinner, if you want to walk around, great, get some exercise. If you got people you can talk to, that's great too. But if there's no one around and you're not walking, then you might as well watch an educational video. A smart person can read magazines if they're good magazines. I've known some people who just read all these, nonsense magazines, People magazine and stuff, and I think that's a whole bunch of nonsense. But it's better than nothing. At least they're reading something. With kids, I think it doesn't matter what they read, just the fact that they read, that they learn that reading can be enjoyable. Like my kid used to read the stupidest comic books, but it made him happy, so he was reading something, so that was good for him. Okay, a person who likes to read books, and I can also judge a person's intellect by how much they read. I know the smartest doctors I know, they're the ones who read the most, okay? And, it could be fiction or nonfiction. It doesn't matter. Nonfiction, I think goal-orientated reading is a sign of higher intelligence than just sort of random reading. My dad used to just read randomly because he enjoyed it, and it relaxed him after a long, busy day of working as a doctor. And he did teach me a lot of cultural stuff, but I noticed in his reading, and I was real intimidated and impressed by my father when I was young. But as I got older, I realized, like he would just read sort of randomly to amuse himself. And he would tend to read whatever was the best-selling book amongst intellectuals. But he didn't read intensely concentrated on answering a question, which is how I read. And I felt I was a lot smarter than my dad once I got older. Because before I was a little bit intimidated to argue with him or my uncle, who was also a doctor. But once I got older, I realized I could just kick their butts intellectually with ease. It wasn't even a challenge. And it would be because I would focus on a topic. Okay, you want to talk about the Vietnam War? I'll read 10 books on the Vietnam War, and I'll debate you in 5 seconds. And rather than them just reading their 1 or 2 favorites and not really being prepared for the conversation. Okay, so listen to educational audiobooks or podcasts. Yeah, too. Like I sometimes see young guys who, they just want to listen to beat music or watch, stupid movies or stupid sitcoms. And I'm like, go ahead, do what you want, but you're not developing your brain very much by doing that. That's sort of lowbrow, mediocre crap. TV is always going to be lowbrow because it has to advertise to a low IQ audience. So there's never going to be anything intelligent on TV. At least on the computer, you could pick something for a more select audience. Okay, somebody who enjoys intellectual conversation. It's a sign of an intelligent person that they enjoy discussing a topic, and that they can just discuss the topic. The conversation is the topic. It's not a personal conversation. You're not going to get emotional. Because I have a lot of doctors who I talk to, and the doctors who are the smart ones will just analyze the subject. Why does this person have spine degeneration? Is it because their abdominal aorta is calcified and they're stenosing their lumbar arteries? Is it because their diet, their glyphosate, is distorting the collagen of their ligaments, the anterior longitudinal ligament, the posterior longitudinal ligament? Do you think it's because they had trauma? Do you think it's because they sat on their butt all day long as a truck driver for 20 years? You know, and then we'll subtly go into it. Or do you think this is something else? Do you think that's a fracture? Anyways, what I'm trying to say is the smart people, we can go nuance after nuance after nuance, and we just keep delving into the subject, and those are the real smart people. Okay, classical music. Classical music, you know, there's something intellectual about it, you know. Christian music too, it's great. You know, I had a time when I used to sit in the same office as this other guy, and he went to a Catholic high school, and we just loved listening to all the classical music. It was very pleasant to recount all our old memories and go through all this music. It's very enjoyable. It kind of mellows you out, lowers your stress level, and I think that's good for your health, good for your healing. Rock and roll is a little bit neutral, but beat music, man, is it stupid. Grunge heavy metal is just stupid. Like I said, you can't hold the thought in your brain. You can't, with the Christian music or the classical music, I'm listening to it, I'm thinking about it. My mind is working, my mind is happy. With this type of stuff, I'm cringing. Okay, how much education they have. Education is basically kind of going through the hoops, you know, like a dolphin at SeaWorld. You know, you got to get your ticket punched to move on to the next level. And for a lot of jobs, like let's say, you know, to be a doctor or something, you got to get your pre-med certification, then you got to get your MD. And part of it is they're weeding out the intellectual mavericks. That's my dog, got my dog close. Okay, so anyways, you just have to do it, and it's really a memorization contest. I talked about that in my study skills lecture, so you want to be good at it. But still, if a person's dropped out of high school, you don't think they're as smart. Although a person who's motivated could learn more on their own than a high school will ever teach them. Same thing than a college will teach them. But you do need the degrees for certain jobs, and you do think a person's smarter if they've finished high school, they finished college. So in general, you'll estimate them to be a little brighter, even though it's really not always that simple. Okay, and if they got more advanced degree education, especially in something challenging, you'll think they're brighter. It also shows they've got a personality they could stick to pursuing a goal and accomplish it in the 4 years or whatever it takes for a college degree or for a graduate degree. Okay, their diet, of course, you can tell, you know, you go to the grocery store and you see a fat person putting soda pop and beer and junk food into their grocery cart, you think that's a fat, stupid person, okay? And then you see a skinny person, you know, putting a bunch of health food. You think, well, that's a more intelligent person, at least on the subject of health, higher nutrition IQ. And, you know, the more vegan whole food you go, low fat, the better you are. Because also people sometimes ask me, well, so-and-so, some other nutrition doctor recommends fat or this or that. And my advice would be take a close look at who's saying that. Quite often you'll see that same person is selling something or is benefiting or is being sponsored by someone in that field or something. Okay, TV. TV's totally stupid. Like I said, you should never watch TV. You shouldn't even have a TV in your house. Toxic exposures. If they smoke cigarettes, that's stupid. I've seen young women and they're just, you know, morons. It's like your physical attractiveness is a very valuable thing. The easiest way for a woman to make money is marry a guy, okay, who has a job and gives her money. And you can argue with that all you want. There's nothing easier than that. I know from a lot of experience, okay? My wife looks at me as like a robot who just gives her money, okay? What a great deal. I wish I was married to myself. And people say, oh, well, you shouldn't talk like that. Your wife's going to get upset. I'm like, oh, bullshit. I wish I was married to myself. You know, owned a robot that gave me money, okay? You know, when you work and get educated, you got to get that education. You got to pay your academic tuitions and loans, and then you got to work. You got to put those hours in every day. When you got a husband, you know, he just gives you money, okay? That's a good deal. You might have to pop out a few kids or something, okay? But it's about as easy as it gets. So why am I going into that with smoking cigarettes? Because cigarettes is like the fastest way for a woman to make herself ugly. I mean, a woman, I've seen women just sort of destroy their physical appearance very quickly by smoking. Smoking makes you all shriveled up. It decreases your attraction. I one time had a really nice girlfriend, and she got to hanging around with this stupid girl and started smoking. And she was like my beautiful girlfriend. All of a sudden, she stunk like a cigarette. It was really disgusting. I told her. Alcohol, a little bit. Some people do it, and they're really nice, good people. But the more alcohol they drink, the worse, the stupider they get. MJ is just a sign of stupidity. It causes brain damage. It causes schizophrenic breakdowns. It can be laced with PCP and other chemicals. I've seen a lot of people ruin their life because of MJ. And a lot of times it's weird. MJ is one of those weird things where the person thinks they're smart, but they're really stupid. Whenever somebody tries to tell me MJ is a good thing, I just try to get away from them as fast as possible. I don't want to listen to this stupid jerk waste my time. Okay, a person who takes a lot of medicines, they may think that they're being proactive with health. No, it's a sign you're screwing up. And, fix your problem if you can with low-fat vegan diet, avoiding toxins, and then take medicines if you have to, but tons and tons of people. It's pretty common. Ask anybody that works in a hospital. It's real common to see people over 50 on 5 medicines, people over 60 on 10 medicines or more. And and they're cognitively slow, okay, usually if they're on 10 or more medicines. Okay, so this assessment was just ways to judge yourself. So if you see yourself heading in one of these directions, try to fix the problem before you make yourself stupider. And people can really dramatically improve their intellectual ability if they want to. The first step is to be aware of it. The second step is the desire to change. The third is to be willing to change, and then to make the changes. And you're also, I know that some ways this paper was kind of, this little IQ assessment thing is kind of funny because some people have so many negatives it's almost like they have an IQ less than 0, but they've lowered their value intellectually, and you need that, and they've also lowered their ability to be trusted. So anyways, I write a lot about intellectual stuff, academics, intelligence, IQ, and how to increase cognitive performance. So this was sort of like part 1 of doing a quick little self-assessment and assessing other people. So hopefully it was useful.